For instance, the way slaves were transported from Africa to Suriname and so on.
Mm-hmm. To Suriname, yeah, that was a Dutch colony, so the Dutch also transported a lot of slaves.
Yeah, towards Suriname. And in the ships, hundreds or thousands of slaves were dying. So you could say that that's mass murder, like in exploitation murder. But I think it's different because the purpose was not to kill them. And the cynical solution they search, it's really cynical, is that they just went to Africa again and get more slaves. There were a few Indonesians and some Chinese got secondary education, a few, yeah? And only a very, very few could go to university. But those people who went to university, they were very, very interesting people. And that was the moment that my father got to know Indonesian students, and he saw how intelligent they were. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
When do you think you first made that connection? Because you were very young at the time. When do you think you first started to think, this kind of domination that I experienced at the hands of other people is similar to the kind of domination that people from my country exert over the Indonesian people?
I think that the position and the influence of my parents has been very important, because they, in their life, they made a change. In fact, they were a colonial way of thinking when they went there, but very soon. Because of this position of my father being a judge in that Landraad, and he saw that it was unfair the way Indonesians were treated in comparison to the Dutch. That was the first thing of changing in his mind. And then he became a professor in Jakarta, Batavia, the law university of law. And then that's important thing also, that there were, that the colonial authorities in the Dutch people, they did not do very much about education of the Indonesian people. If you compare that to India, for example, it's much less. So there was a lot of analphabetism, and there
Literacy.
were only a few
illiteracy, right? Yeah.
illiteracy, and there were a few Indonesians and some Chinese got secondary education, a few, and only a very, very few could go to university. But those people who went to university, they were very, very interesting people. And that was the moment that my father got to know Indonesian students, and he saw how intelligent they were and how able to understand everything. And then there seemed to, my father wrote memories. So and of course I talked a lot about all this. I was kind of a pupil of his. Then he said at a certain moment to my mother, "Hey, I have figured out something. The good students, the students who are really intelligent and doing a good study, they are all in favor of independence. So what is going on here?" And then, of course, all kinds of other experiences made him think. And then he was put in jail right at the beginning, because he was in the army of defending Batavia.
So he was in the Dutch colonial army, right?
Yeah, of the Stadswacht was that. So only for defending the stad, the town Batavia.
Right.
And of course he was there before the war, because they had to exercise. But then at a certain moment, when the Japanese came in, he was imprisoned immediately. So my mother and the three of us were several months later imprisoned, but he was right away. And then, of course, he had been 3.5 years in, as long as the occupation of the Japanese was. 3.5 years, he was in prison, and that's something that strikes me too. That there were many books. We had also books in our camp. Everyone took one or two books, but if you are with 2,000 people, you have many books, because they were all exchanged, of course. So he has been reading as far as he had to do duties and scores hated, and so on. And he met socialists. In my writing, I mention the names. I think that's not important now to do, but he met some important socialists, and they were also in favor of the independence. So
so these were very anti-imperialist, these socialists.
Yeah.
Right.
And but I think that even more important than this was that he experienced what it was to be suppressed, to have hunger, to be hoe noem je dat, vernederd?
To be humiliated.
To be humiliated, to be all the time searching to which category you belong, in order to be not too much punished. This categorization is also a very, very important piece of racism. As you know, I have written a lot about becoming mixtures. I'm a mixture myself, Jewish,
Me too.
non-Jewish.
Yeah.
You too.
Yeah.
And I think that if everyone is a mixture in the future, because everyone is getting children from different groups, then racism will be finished. That's what I hope.
I hope so. Yes. But I'm afraid humans will always invent new categories. But let's hope that racism at least can be one. So I want to get back to that very interesting point you made about your father teaching in the university.
Yeah.
And then he met these very smart Indonesian young men and women.
Intellectuals.
Yeah. Intellectuals, yes.
Yeah.
And that actually almost shattered his old image of that was indoctrinated of simple, stupid Indonesians, and that actually showed their humanity. Like, hey, wait a minute, they're human beings like us, just as smart as us.
Yeah, but you know, Karim, what was very nice that he admitted to me also that there has been a little stage in his thinking that was that, okay, the intellectual Indonesians are equal with us, but does it also count for the population? But that has been only a very short track in his development.
Mm-hmm. But that was actually something you would see everywhere, even in Europe. They would see the working class or the lower class would also be seen as often as quite unintelligent and stupid. So that is a kind of classism you would also see, huh?
Yeah.
Right. So that is very interesting to me, that transformation in your father in the beginning, because it shows that how important it is that other groups of people, for example, African Americans also in the United States, get the kind of representation that shows them in all of their complexity and humanity, for people to really lose these stereotypical conceptions of other people. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that is, to me, extremely fascinating. And of course, then suddenly the role reversal, what you say, that the Japanese were the oppressor all of a sudden, and treating the white Dutch as and humiliating them and treating them as lower human beings, and then suddenly realizing, like, hey, wait a minute, this is the way oppression feels. And suddenly realizing that.
Yeah, but I think in his mind and also in mine, the combination of experiencing what it is to be discriminated against, and thinking, of course, understanding mechanisms, and
right,
and I that's why I think that education, making people understand how the mechanisms work. That's also important. I think, I hope, in fact, that it's not necessary that everyone has to experience what it is to be discriminated against.
Yeah, you make
it. They understand.
Yeah, right, and you make a super good point there, because I agree. It would be unfeasible for everyone to go through that process to understand what racism is doing. And that brings us to a very important point that I also always say, and I think that's also very important for the audience who may be listening to this, is that to really understand racism, to really understand why it happens, where it comes from, we must go to the roots. How do these mechanisms work? Where does it come from? So we finally understand what this is, how we can get rid of this. And I think the people such as you, yourself, and your father and your mother, that you're telling and educating the people and telling your story, like on your website, is so crucial, because sometimes it feels like we are not progressing at all. And I think one of the biggest issues that we are not progressing is that people are uneducated about what racism actually is. It's not a natural state of human life. It is, you can almost say, like a very recent new religion, new categories that have been created. Yeah.
Karim, I agree completely, and I hope I may tell now a little bit, or is it finishing now?
No. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. Now, I would like to show this. because this is what I, from the lessons from my father, I worked further, and then I made this, and it's on my website, of course, so everyone can look it up.
Yeah.
And
so what I will do, AnneRuths, is you can just put it down. When I make the video later on, then I will put it big on the screen for the viewers, so they can see it themselves.
Okay.
So you can just tell it.
Yeah. Okay. Then I would like to tell that that what my father did, dividing racism, the racism he saw in Indonesia when he came there, he divided it in two kinds.
So before you start, sorry to interrupt you, AnneRuths. So your father became a sociologist, right? He started to study racism after the war, correct?
Oh yes.
Yes. Okay. And this is the
he
time
has
that
been he has been a professor in sociology of Southeast Asia. That was his.
Right, and that was the time he
was in Amsterdam. He has been a professor here from 47 to when he got very, very old. So.
Okay, so this is the moment he started to really find out about these specific kinds of racism, right? During his time as a sociologist.
Two of them, not more than two.
Two types of racism.
Yeah. And I think that they are very, very important, and they explain a lot. And that's why I am all the time trying to give lectures and everything to make people understand that what the people in normally or generally talk about when they talk about racism, they always only talk about disdain, looking down, and so on, and they forget about jealousy, envy. And I think that the other kind of
definitely
that is much or not more important, of course, but as important as looking down, because the violence that goes along with the competition kind of racism is much more severe and massive then, and that's what I try to explain. And now I think what I did was to put down the characteristics of each of them. So when we go to exploitation racism, then the most important or one of the most important questions is, of course, where does it occur? And then and that's with competition also. And
so just for the audience, so you have your father said we have two kinds of racism: exploitation racism and competition racism. Right. Yeah. Okay. And they have their own specific characteristics.
Yeah, and I've divided them on 5 sub
dimensions.
Yeah. So the first one is, where does it occur? And then it's important that this occurs in apartheid in South Africa, slavery, of course, and then all the colonizing minorities that suppress the original inhabitants of the colony. That was what in Indonesia was the case. And then, of course, the Afro-Americans in America, in the United States.
Yeah.
And then as far as the competition racism, where does it occur? And that is minorities all around the world, Chinese in different Asian countries, then in Uganda of Amin, the dictator Amin, there they were the Indians. They were thrown out at a certain moment, but they were also a minority that was discriminated against by competition racism. And then maybe of course, Jews in pre-war Europe. And I don't know, you two are maybe more able to see this, but I think that the Rohingyas also might belong to this category, because I read somewhere that they were commercial minority as well. So, but you can see this. But the last time I found out a new group, and I think that's important. That are the Black people in the United States in 1921. That's not yet on my website, because I just found out. They were Black people living in Tulsa, in Oklahoma, and the group was called Black Wall Street. Yeah, and they were mass murdered. And so they belong to this kind of groups that
competition racism. Yeah,
suffer competition. Then an important thing is the prejudice, of course. Then we had already, I gave them already superstitious, childlike, lazy, stupid, backward, and then that's for exploitation racism. And the others are sly, unreliable, sinister religion. That's important as prejudice as well. Disloyal to the state and disloyal to the other people, of course. And then this is here you can, of course, introduce what you said, Peter, the wise of of Zion, the protocol.
Yeah, and this is also very interesting because
that they are henchmen of that they want to suppress the whole world, or to dominate the whole world. That's
so these conspiracies you often see behind competitive racism. And you see it also with Muslims now. You see it in the United States with Ilhan Omar, her double loyalty. In the Netherlands, you see it.
Oh, that's used in the Netherlands also towards, because they had a double passport, and that makes them unreliable or not disloyal to the state, and so on. Yeah. Okay. Then the motives. I have a whole research done about motives, and I think there is important that you should not only look at the motives that are visible or that the people express, but you should also think about the motives that are underneath, that they keep a secret. Maybe it is so that I forgot this a little intermezzo, that when we went to that Tangerang camp, my mother said to us, "You should keep secret that I am not Jewish at all, and that you are only half." So I learned already at a very young age that keeping things secret when you are suppressed can save you from worse. But this keeping things secret is, of course, the same thing that is used by people who want to suppress. So, for instance, I think that looking down on people in exploitation racism is, of course, very nice to be to as if you are better. But you never will say this.
Right. So you mean that with exploitation racism, it actually makes the racist feel good
Yes,
to oppress other people. It gives a kind of ego boost, you mean?
Yeah,
but people keep that in secret.
Yeah, but another thing is that it gives you the feeling of being togetherness feeling with the people that are also thinking those people are lazy and so on, and we are better.
So it has. So to summarize what you just say, so you say that kind of racism has two effects. One is it makes people feel personally good, like, okay, I can put other people down. It gives people an ego boost, and at the same time, I am better. And at the same time, it has a kind of group identification effect where you actually feel stronger bonds with other oppressors, so to speak. And that's a kind of collective effect.
So many people who feel they are quarreling a lot and they have many difficulties with other people, even with friends, then they can feel a feeling of being together.
United, right?
I've written one article about that racism is in fact being verslavend.
Yeah, addiction, kind of addiction.
Yeah. I like that article. That was really good.
I think that people who feel terrible and all the time have difficulties, it's wonderful to be to have other people who are agreeing with you that those people don't are not good at all and you are better. That gives a full feeling of. But I think that that's also in exploitation. This kind of slave addiction also counts. The whole thing, except for feeling better because you are pressing down others. In exploitation, it's of course being afraid of them, being jealous.
You mean in competition racism, I think, right?
In competition racism.
So in exploitation racism, you feel good because you can push people down, and you have a kind of identity effect when you discuss it with other group members.
Yeah.
But in you say in competition racism, it's actually it helps to wane off the fear for the other person.
What I wrote down about it was openly. So I make all the time difference between openly and hide it, covertly motives. Yeah?
Right.
So in competition education, openly fear and distrust, and justification for exclusion. So justification, and then covertly, I think jealousy there is in capitalist countries, and almost the whole world is capitalist now. So in capitalist countries, jealousy is something you have to hide. You are strong, you are going to overcome, you are doing better, and so on, and that you are jealous on certain people. That's not that's a taboo on it. Even
it's a kind of weakness in capitalist societies. We need to be strong, entrepreneurial, and all that kind of stuff. And jealousy is a kind of a bad thing.
But I think that there is a taboo on it, even that it's worse than just hiding. And then desire to make this group a scapegoat. So that's comparable to the feelings of in exploitation racism. That it's also nice to feel together with all the racists thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
But in exploitation, it's in fact making a scapegoat, because it's also a minority. And in exploitation racism, there are it's mostly large groups.
Yeah. So to summarize it a bit for the audience. So what you see is, and you make a clear distinction between two kinds of racism. You have exploitation racism and competition racism, and both kinds of racism also have a kind of, like an addict, the person who engages in that racism is kind of a feel-good effect. And that is, in exploitation racism, you can look down on people, which makes you feel good, but you can also discuss with other people that you look down on another group, that makes social bonds within your own group. And then in competition racism, you would feel envy, because in competition racism, like the Chinese or the Jews, or in the old days, in the 20s, the Afro-Americans with Wall Street, you feel envy, you feel jealousy, but you don't want to admit that's something, that's weakness. So you translate that openly into, oh, they are not, you cannot trust them, they have evil intentions.
Yeah. I think that might also be part of the addiction aspect, because even in competition racism, if you're viewing the other group as sly, untrustworthy, morally inferior, I think maybe people also can get addicted to the feeling of moral superiority. So like today, you can see that in the kind of like US foreign policy establishment attitude towards China. Like, yes, they're competitive and we need to worry about this competition, but they're also very sly and very untrustworthy and totalitarian and evil and conniving and sneaky. And so that I think might actually give people a good feeling of moral superiority.
Yes, of course. That's of course what the Nazis had towards the Jews also.
Right, exactly. The Jews are sneaky, conniving conspirators, so we're also morally superior to them.
But the important thing about it is that this is kept secret. Those feelings are not expressed. And that makes that people who you are educating in racism, they should be aware that if they, for instance, I'm very critical about enquêtes, inquiry, hoe noem je dat? Written. Ik versta je even niet.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. You mean surveys?
Surveys, yeah.
Surveys.
What people say that they think about racism also, it's just part of it.
Right.
Absolutely,
so,
I agree.
So it's very complicated to understand what is really in their minds.
Definitely. And that is also a problem often in psychological studies, that when you do open surveys, you often try to actually come to the unconscious bias. So you do experiments, because people openly almost never give their real intentions why they are racist. It almost never happens.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know how you how it can be, but this is it. Okay. Then eventjes kijken hoor.
Sure.
So I had jealousy of the competitive force of the minority, a desire to make this group the scapegoat, but not only for the specific field they are in, but for everything in the world, in the society. This is what they also do. So the Muslims here in Holland and in Western Europe are the cause of every problem, not only for little things like being better in commerce, or the Muslims is thing apart. We can.
Yeah, the Muslims is in a very extreme case in the Netherlands. I think people in the United States, like Peter, they don't realize how extreme and all-encompassing the Muslim hatred is in the Netherlands and other parts of Europe. It's really, really extreme. It's unbelievable. I think it's even worse than in the United States, who actually engages in the war on terror. I think it's much worse in Europe.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can come later. Nou, then even kijken. Yeah, so what I think is important, that this sense of unity, of being united, you can see this in both kinds of racism. Mm-hmm. But it's a little bit different, of course. Yeah. Okay. And then
I definitely think that is a very important aspect you talk about, which doesn't get enough emphasis, is not only the ego boosting effect, of course, of racism, but also how it makes groups feel united, like that collectivist effect of hating on another group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, then violence, that's an important thing too. And I think that in both kinds of racism, violence is completely different. And I think that in the kind of racism exploitation, the aim of the violence is always to warn people to be quiet, not to ask for much money, and so on. Yeah? So to just keep them working without anything trying to, and that's, I think that the interesting thing about this is that I could see this so easily, of course, because we in the camp had the same experience, that certain persons were punished in front of us in order to keep us down. Mm-hmm. That was what happened. And I think that there are many examples of it. For instance, the way slaves were beaten in front of the group, coolies, so the Indonesian workers in all the colonial colonies, it was the same thing on the plantages. So that was always aimed at the ones that were standing up. Mm-hmm. So it was an individual kind of punishing. But I think that it's interesting that, I'll tell it later. Then the other one, there's exploitation, then it's always aimed on...
You mean competition. You mean the other one is competition,
sorry,
right?
Sorry.
Yeah.
In competition kind of racism, the violence is towards a group. Because what is the aim of the violence is to get them out. Mm-hmm. As a group. That was what happened in Tuzla with those African Americans, but that's always, of course, also what happened with the Jews. Mm-hmm. in a very
extremely violent way.
Extremely way, but it happened many times in Indonesia with the Chinese. For instance, and what always the same thing, if you combine it with colonialism, that the Dutch, when there was a pogrom against the Chinese in Indonesia, it sometimes started with Indonesians being a little bit jealous, and they were, of course, they were also a little bit suppressed by Chinese. It's very complicated. But however the pogrom started, the Dutch always allowed it for several days and then kept it down. Hoe noem je dat?
Interesting.
Yeah.
And why is that?
I think that the Dutch were jealous as well on the Chinese.
Right, and that is actually a very scary thing, because I would think that governments within our governments would also let that happen. I think so. For example, if we would have you could say a kind of sometimes politicians say there will be a race war or whatever. If you would have one group, let's say in the United States, Latin Americans, having issues with African Americans, and then let it go on for a few days, and then you jump in just because you play along with that divide and conquer strategy.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
That's very, very that's so nefarious. That's so insidious.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. But so the examples I give with the violence in competition racism, that's the Jews, the Holocaust programs, and also maybe against Rohingya. But I suppose, and of course Tusla. But you certainly will have more examples. And then now in exploitation racism, that's this one thing I think. In general, I think violence in exploitation racism is against individuals, but there are some strange uitzonderingen.
Exceptions, yeah.
Exceptions. For instance, the way slaves were transported from Africa to Suriname and so on.
Mm-hmm. To Suriname, yeah, that was a Dutch colony, so the Dutch also transported a lot of slaves.
Yeah, towards Suriname. And in the ships, hundreds or thousands of slaves were dying. So you could say that that's mass murder, like in exploitation murder. But I think it's different because the purpose was not to kill them. And the cynical solution they search, it's really cynical, is that they just went to Africa again and get more slaves. Mm-hmm. But it's, of course, an example of more exploited people are killed. And yes. I think there are more examples of this. For instance, when the Dutch made the Postweg on Java, you know, they made a very big way from the one side of Java to the other.
Yeah, a big road, right.
A big road, it's still there. The Postweg.
Postweg, okay.
There were thousands of Indonesian workers who died as well, by illness, by being, you can understand what happened there.
And also by Dutch violence, I guess? Also
no,
by the...
Yeah, also a little bit, of course, by sometimes beating someone, but most of them by getting not enough food and illness. Mm-hmm. So that's also a mass murder in a situation of exploitation racism. And I think there's another interesting example, and that happened in Burma. When the Japanese were constructing the railway there, they used a lot of people, also Dutch military, hoe noem je dat, krijgsgevangenen?
Dutch military prisoners? Dutch prisoners of war. Prisoners of war.
Prisoners of war. You know, there also thousands Dutch men died. Mm-hmm. And that was also a kind of exploitation racism, of course, of the Japanese towards the Dutch.
Right, yes.
So that's a very interesting kind of mass murder in exploitation racism. But again, the killing was not on purpose.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so that you could say the mass killings in exploitation racism are often indirect killings, you could say. Like, it's not the purpose to kill them, but it's a kind of neglect. You neglect their situation to such an extent that you don't care that so many of them die.
And if they die,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's like manslaughter through negligence. Like, you don't care if they live or die. You'll work them to death. It doesn't matter to you.
Right. And with competition racism, there is this real intention to wipe people out.
Yes, and it's in exploitation racism, you always can recognize also what the fact that it is on purpose. You can figure out from what comes before. Before there is several steps. And those steps are, for instance, that is the last point of the thing, that's the demarcation of the group. So in exploitation racism, for instance, the Jews.
So just to quickly jump in, so you mean that there are a specific kind of predictors that say violence is probably coming because you can see developments in society towards that moment of violence.
Prediction, we can as anti-racist people, we can predict it, but it's a preparation. It is the preparation of the racist group that is, or the society that is going to wipe them out. And the first thing is to the demarcation, to make the demarcation clear. So,
racial demarcation, right?
Yeah, and that was what the Germans did with the Jews. First of all, they said if a Jew is married to a non-Jew, then they are not a Jew in fact. And then at a certain point they said all the Jews from the whole country had to go to Amsterdam, and they have to live in 3 different designated areas. And then that's just to administration or something. And in my eyes, it was terrible that they did. Most of them did, because they didn't preview, of course, what was happening. But and some of them just didn't have the money or the possibilities or to onderduiken, to hide.
To hide, yeah. So most of them just listened to it. Most of the Jews most of the Jews in the Netherlands and went to Amsterdam in designated areas to stay there.
And then they were put in a camp in the Netherlands, which was not aimed to destroy them. They were there sometimes for months, and then finally they went to the destruction camps in Poland. But you can see this sequence of happenings, and this is completely different from the kind of mass murder, if it happens in exploitation racism.
So the warning signs are first that you get a racial demarcation, right? So you get people start to engage in racial demarcation, and are there other steps after that? Specific steps?
Even kijken hoor. Of course, the increasing of the prejudice. You can say, and there's an important thing also, that just before the killing starts, so in pogroms in Asia against groups, or in Europe, wherever, in the United States as well, in Africa as well, then then at the end, then suddenly kinds of prejudice come in that do look down on people, because my explanation so far is that it's easier to kill someone if he is not a real human being.
Mhm.
So dehumiliation, and that's of course has similar things to what people are doing in exploitation racism, looking down on people, saying they are nothing more than a cockroach, hoe heet het, een kakkerlak.
Yeah, cockroach. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
cockroach.
cockroach. Yeah.
Yeah. So that happens just before the pogrom starts, but that's very before they are dangerous, unreliable, disloyal, taking our jobs, taking our wives, taking whatever. But then so this kind of prejudice comes in.
Yeah, so that is very dangerous, because you see that now as well. You see an increase in that, what I always call conspiratorial kind of thinking towards another group. The moment that starts, that really conspiratorial, they're overtaking Europe, they're Islamizing Europe, or the Jewification of Germany, all that kind of stuff.
Sharia everywhere.
Sharia law everywhere. And you see actually a similar kind of thing happening now to Chinese. You see conspiratorial thinking in the United States, not as much in Europe, but in the United States, about the conniving Chinese and the yellow peril and that kind of stuff.
You know, when Corona started here, a Chinese friend of mine was kind of attacked in the tramway, because he looks Asian, of course, and people were attacking him in words, as far, because he should be the reason of Corona.
Right.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you. Sorry, go ahead.
I want to go back to where my understanding from demarcation comes from. Because that's, of course, what I experienced in the camp. And that suddenly it was very important, and it had all kinds of results for me, losing my friends, going to another camp, and so on, because the demarcation was put now so that being Jewish had something to do with it, was important. So I think that and this is also going back to the idea that everyone should be a combination of their parents, the combis. Yeah?
Right.
That if it is not possible anymore to make demarcation, you understand already, then it will be much more difficult to exclude groups.
Yeah, and that also shows the subjectivity of the whole simplistic racialized thinking, because you cannot demarcate, actually. You can't, because if you have somebody like me who's mixed, or yourself, AnneRuths, or somebody who has even more mixtures, that is all, I mean, in the end, it's just human beings who are mating with each other and getting a child. But because we humans socially create these categories that are so overly simplistic, the moment it becomes a little bit complex, it just doesn't work anymore.